distinguished witnesses, we're very pleased to have you with us today as we discuss NASA's future in low Earth orbit, considerations for the International Space Station's extension and transition. The International Space Station, ISS, has been an important component of America's post-Apollo human spaceflight program for decades. Beginning in 1984 with President Reagan's resurrecting the idea of developing a crewed orbiting station that would include our allies and our partners, followed by President Clinton's decision to include the Russians in a redesigned station. It has continued through multiple Congresses and administrations with development, assembly, and now full utilization. In many ways, the ISS epitomizes the long-term continuity of purpose that is essential for our human spaceflight program. During its more than 2 decades of operation, the ISS has cemented our international partnerships, enabled knowledge of large structural assembly in space, supported extensive basic and applied research, maintained U.S. expertise in human spaceflight operations, enabled the development of public-private partnerships for cargo and crew transportation to the ISS, and open space to multiple users, including commercial entities, academia, and other federal government agencies. And it allowed me to just recite the longest sentence I've ever seen. Perhaps most importantly, it continues to inspire our youth as they are born into an era that has never been without an American living and working in low Earth orbit. This committee and multiple Congresses have shaped U.S. policy related to the ISS. Today, we must continue to exercise our responsibilities as we face important decisions on the future of NASA's role in low Earth orbit, the duration of ISS operations, what should follow, and ensuring a U.S. presence in LEO. By the way, the nice part about this being remote for many of you is you don't have to listen to those expletive deleted bells all day. Anyway, has the ISS fulfilled its purpose? If not, what additional objectives need to be achieved during the ISS lifetime? How much time is needed? And is the ISS as a facility structurally fit to support the duration required to achieve those objectives? And if we're going to consider extending the ISS, we'll need assurances of its structural integrity. Because whether due to routine use, aging, or otherwise, the ISS structure is not problem-free. A debris hit to the Canadian arm, air leaks in the Russian segment, and the incident of the newly attached Russian module firing its thrusters, causing the ISS to flip until attitude control was regained, are recent examples. The 2020 annual report of the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel, the ASAP, recommended that NASA document the ISS life-limiting systems and components through and beyond 2028, which are considered to be of highest risk to ISS lifetime, and that NASA assess the engineering lead time required to develop and fly solutions to the highest risk failures if they were to occur before 2028. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on this matter. Whatever decisions made on the lifetime of ISS operations, we need a strong plan in place to ensure research and related activities that can be transitioned seamlessly to alternative capabilities without a gap. And as we look to ISS transition, there's no getting around the fact that we'll need to consider the plan for deorbiting the facility and the costs and responsibilities for that action. The 2017 NASA Authorization Act directed NASA to develop a plan to transition in a stepwise approach from the current regime that relies heavily on NASA sponsorship to a regime where NASA could be one of many customers of a LEO non-governmental human spaceflight enterprise. NASA's current post-ISS plans are to use commercial LEO platforms or destinations to support its future activities in low Earth orbit and to purchase services from commercial LEO providers. While commercial activities in LEO are developing, multiple market studies have shown that commercial demand is not yet sufficient to support a commercial LEO platform or platforms, and that NASA will need to be an anchor tenant for the foreseeable future. To that end, we'll need to understand NASA's costs and related commitments once ISS operations cease, and what NASA support a private LEO platform will need at what level and for how long. We'll also need to understand the demand for a national laboratory at low Earth orbit following the end of ISS. Because of all these decisions, while consequential from a U.S. policy perspective, they also come with cost and resource implications, and we need to go in with our eyes wide open. There's $3 to $4 billion annual cost of operating the station for whatever duration is decided, in addition to any NASA investment in commercial platform development and the future costs associated with purchasing commercial LEO services. And who's to pay for the sustainment of commercial LEO platforms, including repairs, supplies, and ground-based mission operations? Will commercial providers be prepared to bear all of these costs? And what level of savings is NASA anticipating to accrue from being a customer? Well, we have a lot to discuss today, and I look forward to our witness testimonies. In closing, our decisions about the ISS and what follows are not only essential to sustaining our research in LEO, they also concern our nation's strategic presence in space. How we'll continue to engage with our international partners in LEO in a post-ISS era, and the implications of other activities, including China's space station, must be considered. The ISS partnership is a beacon of and a vehicle for peaceful international cooperation in outer space that has built the foundation for our collaborative next steps in human exploration, Moon to Mars. Maintaining the fabric of this peaceful coalition must guide us as this subcommittee and committee continues to shape our nation's policy for civil space in low Earth orbit and outer space. Now let me recognize my good friend, the ranking member of the Space Subcommittee, Dr. Brian Babin from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate it. We are at an inflection point for our nation's space program. And last year, NASA once again launched American astronauts on American rockets from American soil. Earlier this summer, we witnessed 2 suborbital commercial human launches. Just last week, the first spaceflight participant mission achieved orbit. The Space Launch System will launch within a few months, and the Artemis program will return to the moon, and that is underway. We also celebrated the 20th anniversary of continuous occupation of the International Space Station, the ISS, last November, recognizing Expedition 1 when Bill Shepard ushered in the current era of space exploration. We're privileged to have Bill testify before us today as one of our expert witnesses. A lot has happened since then. We suffered the tragic loss of Columbia in 2003, grounded the shuttle fleet for over 2 years as part of the return to flight effort, and completed space shuttle assembly of the ISS in 2011, canceled the shuttle program as we developed new spacecraft, and relied on the Russian Soyuz launches for crew transfer for far too long. Throughout all of this, the ISS and the international partnerships that enabled it remain resilient. After over 20 years of continuous operations, however, the ISS is beginning to show its age. Cracks and leaks are popping up. Solar arrays were recently upgraded, and the spacesuits necessary for spacewalks need to be replaced. The first segments of the ISS have a design life of roughly 15 years with a safety factor of 2, meaning that with the appropriate life extension measures, the segments can reasonably be expected to last until 2028. While no law prevents NASA from operating the ISS as long as it deems necessary, it is time to have a conversation about the future of the ISS and our presence in low Earth orbit. Section 303 of the 2017 NASA Authorization Act called for NASA to develop an ISS transition plan and to update it biannually. And while this is a good start, no significant decisions have been made about the future of the ISS and our presence in low Earth orbit. While Administrator Nelson expressed support for continuing operations past 2024 at one of our hearings this summer, and many of the international partners have expressed similar support, a formal agreement has not been solidified. Other issues include how to prioritize upgrades to the existing ISS spacesuits used for spacewalks and the development of future spacesuits for the lunar surface, engineering analysis of the lifetime of the ISS, whether we will reciprocate seat swaps with the Russians, and the development of future free flyers and other efforts to offset the operational costs of the ISS. We also need to understand the impacts of the recent incident involving the docking of the Russian Nauka module. I proudly represent Johnson Space Center, home of the historic Mission Control and the ISS program. Many of my constituents have a vested and a personal interest in the success of the ISS. I want to see NASA not only fulfill the expectations of the ISS, but also to carry on its legacy and other programs so that we do not retreat from space. Abandoning the ISS without a clear transition plan in place would only serve the interests of the communist Chinese. Like in other domains, the CCP seeks to exploit vacuums left by the great nations. If they are the only game in town, other nations will seek to partner with them to gain access to space. This would erode American strategic leadership and, unfortunately for those other nations, result in the exploitation of their own scientific, technical, and strategic standing. The ISS is not only a bridge to space, but also a bridge to the other nations. It binds us under the common cause of discovery. I'm sure that all of us share the same goal of ensuring that the ISS and follow-on endeavors continue this special tradition. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Babin, thank you very much. We appreciate that. And now I'd like to recognize the distinguished chair of the entire space, or the Science, Space, and Science, Technology, and Space Committee. You see, I get my priorities correct. Chairwoman Johnson.
Well, thank you and good morning. And Chairman Beyer, I am so pleased that you set this important hearing on International Space Station and NASA's future in low orbit. I want to welcome our distinguished witnesses today and thank you for participating. I also want to thank you for your service. We wouldn't be discussing the International Space Station, its accomplishments, and the plans for its future without your important contributions and those of so many others. And important work remains to be done, including research on human health and performance in space, fundamental microgravity science, life support systems for deep space exploration, and next generation space suit development testing. I certainly hope that these activities, as well as other research, are NASA's priorities, because part of our congressional role is to consider how long the space station should operate. And while novelties such as a private space tourist missions or movie making on the International Space Station may grab media attention, they do not establish the case for extending this unique and one-of-a-kind orbiting laboratory. And as we look forward to the International Space Station, we need NASA to provide a clear accounting of what its specific requirements will be. I am really proud of what NASA and our partners have accomplished with the space station. It has supported humans on orbit for 2 decades, which is a considerable achievement. It also continues to enable an array of research and technology development that advances basic science and our preparations for sending humans to the moon and Mars. I also want to say that I echo Chairman Beyer's comments on the importance of space station to our U.S. leadership and bringing nations together in pursuit of the peaceful use and exploration of outer space. The enduring mission of Peaceful Space Corporation is more important now than ever. While planning for a future beyond the space station is important, the reality is that the International Space Station is still operating. In addition, we look forward and look ahead to NASA's future in low Earth orbit. I hope we also will continue to maintain a focus on STEM engagement and inspiring youth. America's future depends on a 21st century workforce that can continue our science and innovation capabilities, including space. Mr. Chairman, there's so much to discuss at today's hearing, including the structural health of the space station, NASA's plans and cost estimates for what follows, and the need for a clear understanding of what NASA's requirements for the low Earth orbit activities will be once the International Space Station has retired. And finally, given the important geopolitical role that the International Space Station has played, we need to examine how best we can ensure that the U.S. can continue to maintain the international partnerships that the space station has fostered. So with that, I look forward to the witness's testimony, and I yield back. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, thank you very, very much. And now let me recognize the ranking member of the entire committee, the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I simply want to reflect on the wise and wisdom-filled words of my three colleagues, and I look forward to our witnesses and a lively discussion today. And with that, I yield back, and let's proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas, very much. Let me make a couple of the housekeeping things I should have done at the very beginning, which is that without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We are meeting virtually. A couple of reminders: please keep your video feed on as long as you are present in the hearing. Members are responsible for their own microphones, so please keep the microphones muted unless you're speaking. And finally, if members have documents they wish to submit for the record, please email them to the committee clerk, whose email address was circulated prior to our hearing. And now let me introduce at least our witnesses in the best way that I can. Let's see. Our first witness is Ms. Robyn Gatens. Ms. Gatens is the director of the International Space Station at NASA headquarters. As ISS director, Gatens leads strategy, policy, integration, and stakeholder engagement for the space station program at the agency level. In her 35 years at NASA, Ms. Gatens has led the development and management of life support and habitation systems for human spaceflight missions. She has also led agency strategic and budget planning to mature these technologies needed for future deep space explorations, using the ISS as a demonstrated testbed. Ms. Gatens holds a Bachelor of Chemical Engineering degree from Georgia Institute of Technology. Our second witness is Dr. Kate Rubins. Dr. Rubins was selected by NASA as an astronaut in 2009, and Dr. Rubins completed her first space flight in Expedition 4849, where she became the first person to sequence DNA in space. Prior to joining NASA, she worked as a fellow/principal investigator at the Whitehead Institute for Biomedical Research, studying viral diseases that primarily affect Central and West Africa. Dr. Rubins most recently served aboard the International Space Station as flight engineer for Expedition 63/64. Across the two flights, she has spent a total of 300 days in space and conducted 4 spacewalks. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Molecular Biology from the University of California and a PhD in Cancer Biology from Stanford University. Our third witness is Mr. Jeffrey Manber. Manber has served as the CEO of Nanoracks since 2009. Today, Nanoracks has customers in over 30 countries, ranging from governmental agencies to universities and companies, and most recently, the Bishop Airlock, permanently docked to the International Space Station to provide deployment services. Previously, as CEO of Mir Corp, which leased the Russian space station Mir, Mr. Manber oversaw the first commercially funded crewed mission to the Mir space station. He currently serves on the NASA National Advisory Committee on Commercialization and is the chairperson of the CASIS ISS National Lab Users Advisory Subcommittee on Commercial Uses of ISS. Our fourth witness is Mr. Todd Harrison. He's the director of Aerospace Security Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. As a senior fellow in the International Security Program, he leads the center's efforts to provide in-depth, nonpartisan research and analysis of defense funding, space security, and air power issues. He previously worked at Booz Allen Hamilton across the aerospace industry and served as a captain in the U.S. Air Force Reserves. He's a graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, with both a BS and an MS in Aeronautics and Astronautics. And our fifth and final witness is Captain William Shepard. Captain Shepard served as a Navy SEAL, NASA astronaut, program manager, and senior government official with the Department of Defense. He started his military career in 1971 as an underwater demolition frogman and Navy SEAL. In 1984, he was selected as a NASA astronaut. Captain Shepard flew as a mission specialist on 3 space shuttle flights. In 1993, he was selected to serve as program manager for the new International Space Station In 2000, he served as commander of Expedition 1, the first crew of the International Space Station. And then Captain Shepard returned to the Navy in 2001, was the first science advisor for the U.S. Special Operations Command. Captain Shepard consults with government industry organizations and is a member of Stevens Institute Systems Engineering Research Center. He received a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from the U.S. Naval Academy and master's in engineering degrees in mechanical and ocean engineering from MIT. Wow. Well, as your witnesses should know, you each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony, which could be much longer, will be included in the record for the hearing. And when all of you have completed your spoken questions, we'll begin asking you harder questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. And let's start with Ms. Robyn Gatens. Ms. Gatens, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Lucas, Chairman Beyer, Ranking Member Babin, and members of the subcommittee. I'm honored to appear before you to discuss the International Space Station, the world's preeminent orbital microgravity platform for research and development. For more than 20 years, the ISS has supported cutting-edge research that benefits humanity, including in-space manufacturing of novel materials and life-saving medical products. It has helped us to understand the Earth's climate and provided an unparalleled platform for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics engagement. The ISS continues to be a positive example of international partnerships, and the research conducted on the ISS has helped to advance science and improve life on Earth. Today, with commercial crew and cargo transportation systems online, the ISS is busier than ever and provides the United States and our partners with unmatched capabilities in space. The ISS National Laboratory hosts hundreds of experiments from other government agencies, academia, and commercial users. Meanwhile, NASA's research and development on board is advancing the technologies and procedures that will be necessary to send the first woman and the first person of color to the moon and the first humans to Mars. The ISS is now entering its third and most productive decade of utilization, including research advancement, commercial value, and global partnership. The first decade of ISS was dedicated to assembly, and the second was devoted to research and technology development and learning how to most effectively conduct these activities in space. The third decade is one of results, where research capacity will be maximized. Deep space exploration technologies will be verified to support human exploration of the solar system, and medical and environmental benefits will continue to be returned to humanity. This decade is also when the groundwork is laid for a commercial future in space. NASA is already laying the foundation of this future, which includes careful planning to ensure there's no gap in U.S. human spaceflight capability in low Earth orbit, or LEO. The ISS is certified technically to continue to operate until at least 2028, and there are no engineering issues that NASA is aware of that would preclude safely and productively operating the ISS through 2030. Extending the operation of the ISS could give U.S. private industry time to develop the capabilities and experience to operate in LEO and to deploy the platforms that will meet the needs of NASA and other users there. With the introduction of commercial LEO destinations, NASA expects to realize efficiencies from the use of innovative, efficient, and cost-effective platforms, using a more commercial approach to meeting the agency's needs in LEO. This will allow NASA to shift significant financial and personnel resources toward exploration objectives. As commercial LEO destinations become available, NASA intends to implement an orderly transition from current ISS operations to these destinations. NASA envisions a transition period of roughly 2 years, during which both ISS and commercial LEO destinations are operational, allowing gradual transfer of NASA activities from ISS to commercial platforms. NASA intends to purchase services on these commercial platforms for accommodating U.S. astronauts, technology testing, human research, and science. A continuously crewed LEO platform is a more cost-effective place than deep space to test technologies and practice protocols to prepare us for a Mars mission. NASA also plans to continue to provide support for research in LEO based on the successes and lessons learned of the ISS National Laboratory. We hope that our other U.S. government partner agencies will join us in doing so. This will provide continuity for research institutions, U.S. government agencies, and developing industries to continue their work using the unique environment of low Earth orbit. Finally, it is imperative that the United States maintain and expand its international partnerships during and after the transition to commercial LEO destinations. NASA operates the ISS in partnership with 5 other space agencies, representing 15 countries, offering high-profile opportunities for U.S. leadership in civil and robotic spaceflight. At a time when other nations are seeking to expand their abilities to operate in space, the ISS remains the premier example of how an international team can productively and successfully cooperate in space over the course of decades. Further details of NASA's plans for ISS transition are contained in our update to the ISS transition report, which we will deliver to Congress in the coming weeks. Thank you again, and I look forward to your questions.
Ms. Gatens, thank you very much. And now we'll hear from Dr. Rubins. Dr. Rubins, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Lucas, Chairman Beyer, Ranking Member Babin, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Kate Rubins, a NASA astronaut, veteran of 2 long-duration missions aboard the International Space Station, and a molecular biologist. Thank you for the opportunity to share details of the cutting-edge science we're doing on the ISS, and to highlight the tremendous value in having a spaceborne laboratory, where we can do research that is not possible on Earth. I've spent 300 days combined on 2 long-duration missions living and working aboard the ISS. As a researcher, and sometimes simultaneously as a test subject, providing biological samples for further study, I can share firsthand the importance and the unique opportunity for scientific advancements in research made possible by having a research laboratory outside the bonds and limitations of gravity. The ISS is the only place we can currently conduct long-duration research on how living in microgravity affects the human body, and it's the only place we can test technologies that will take us further into deep space. The ISS has offered over 2 decades of human research opportunities in a way that no other platform has been able to accomplish. The things we've learned so far provide a great foundation for us as we reach even further away from our home planet. For future exploration of the Moon and Mars, we need the capability to autonomously monitor the microbial health of spacecraft and planetary habitats, and to potentially identify life via DNA and RNA signatures as well. The ISS gives researchers an environment in which they can test sequencing in microgravity and refine the sequencing processes. During my first mission to the space station in 2016, I had the honor of being the first person to ever sequence DNA in microgravity. Eventually, we sequenced more than 2 billion base pairs of DNA in collaboration with a world-class team of researchers on the ground. During my most recent expedition to space this past year, I was able to build on the past work conducting new DNA sequencing activities. With the ability to sequence DNA in space, astronauts could diagnose an illness or identify microbes growing in the ISS or another habitable spacecraft and determine if they represent a health concern. I also spent many hours during my mission with my arms in the life sciences glove box. We conducted the cardinal heart experiment there. My breath was taken away by the sight of beating heart cells in microgravity for the first time. Cardinal heart studies how changes in gravity affect cardiovascular cells at the cellular and tissue levels. Not only will this research contribute to our success in future space exploration, but it could also impact how we develop treatments for heart disease on Earth. Results could provide new understanding of heart problems on Earth, help identify treatments, and support development of screening measures to predict cardiovascular risk prior to spaceflight or on the ground. As a third example, I took hundreds of microbial samples for the 3-dimensional microbial monitoring study. This experiment provides sequencing and analysis on samples collected from over 1,000 different locations within the space station. By advancing our understanding of the space station microbiome, this work helps identify potential risks and supports developing countermeasures to mitigate those risks. The ISS is a world-class research laboratory where we as astronauts are able to perform research developed by scientists across the world. It is also the most powerful example of collaboration that I've ever witnessed, and I believe one of the most powerful examples of this world-class collaboration. The world needs this example of nations coming together for the greater good, and to see how many amazing things can be accomplished when we work together doing science and exploration in harmony. For more than 20 years, NASA has maintained a continuous human presence in Earth orbit, developing technology, skills, and knowledge needed for the human exploration of the Moon, Mars, and our solar system. The ISS is an active, vibrant laboratory where we are making the next steps of space exploration possible. As we set our sights on the Moon and beyond, it is the knowledge and the practical experience we've gained from more than 20 years of continuous human presence and research on the space station that will pave a successful path forward. What we learn also has grave impacts on Earth and human health, technology, development, and even commercial growth. I hope the foregoing information regarding scientific research operations on the International Space Station has helped shed some light on the value and the importance of having a space-based research platform for scientists and astronauts like me to push the boundaries of the known world, to inspire children, and to learn how we as a species adapt as we reach further into the universe. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before the subcommittee, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Rubins, very much. Fascinating stuff. Now recognize Mr. Jeffrey Manber for his testimony.
Thank you. Thank you. Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Lucas, Chairman Beyer, Ranking Member Babin, and other members of the subcommittee, as well as my friends and fellow panelists. Thank you for this opportunity. My insights are informed by my 3 decades pursuing a stronger commercial space marketplace, as well as being the CEO of Nanoracks, which conducts commercial services on the ISS for organizations and governments, as well as thousands of students engaged in space research. I first testified before this panel and then Chairman Bill Nelson in 1991. As I reviewed that testimony, it is heartening to realize the extraordinary progress that has been made. Our largest utilization challenge in the 90s was NASA's Space Shuttle program. It is remarkable to see how far we have progressed from a single point dependence with the Space Shuttle to a robust commercial launch industry with names like SpaceX and Rocket Lab that are the envy of the world. And that is one of the key considerations as we seek the next steps for the International Space Station. We've been here before, haven't we? And that was how and when to transition from the aging shuttle program. So many strong arguments were made to keep the program operational. But finally, Congress made the bold and correct decision that opened a new era of a launch vehicle industry that is indeed the envy of the world. And now we must do the same and have that dialogue with another beloved program, the ISS. The common thread in the recent extraordinary renaissance of space services is not advances in technology alone, but also the repeated direction by Congress to support commercial participation in NASA activities. For ISS, this has been successfully demonstrated with the commercial cargo program through the use of multiple vehicles, and so too, and soon enough, with commercial crew. The challenge to assure a seamless transition is more urgent today than with the shuttle time, as our reliance on space assets is far greater today, and others seek to fill even the perception of any voids. There is no room for error, lest we cede leadership to other nations. The Chinese space station is a challenge. As part of my written testimony, I have submitted a list of our allies participating on the Tiangong. There is no dispute that in space, when America participates, America leads. So I don't fear cooperation and competition with China, but we cannot allow even the perception that we will cede our 20 plus years of humans working in LEO to others. Like the debate over transitioning from the shuttle program, these are difficult issues. I personally witnessed the decline of the Mir space station from a productive habitat to a fixer-upper. The change was slow, and soon the Mir was less productive as a research platform. Today, there are technical issues with the ISS. Some make the headlines, some do not. But it is clear that no matter the congressional funding, no one can predict how long the ISS will remain efficient. So our national choice is clear. Either push the ISS hardware far beyond the anticipated lifespan or open the door to a new chapter of American leadership that will realize smaller, truly commercial space stations dedicated to research and in-space manufacturing. I choose the latter because recent history has shown that multiplicity in space assets is the safest and most cost-efficient pathway. And recent history has also shown that the private sector, working with NASA, produces cost-efficient and reliable results. I'm less worried about losing a generation of space station personnel, as we are seeing companies like Sierra, Axiom, and Nanoracks hiring big from the ISS community. Members of the subcommittee, I ask you to support the NASA Commercial LEO Destination CLD Free Flyer program to ensure there is no space station gap, and that tomorrow's stations will, like today's launch vehicles, be the envy of the world. Our parent company, Voyager Space, is investing significant capital in a private Nanoracks-led station dedicated to innovative space research. And we are not alone. Industry is ready to lead. I consider the CLD program the pathway to assuring continuation of American leadership in LEO and indeed of the ISS program itself, with a new generation of cost-efficient free-flying platforms, which will continue the ISS tradition of STEM outreach as well. We lack the luxury of our previous challenges. The space domain is today interwoven into the fabric of our society, and its continued health is every American's continued well-being. The lessons learned are clear. We must do all to prevent yet another gap in our basic space capabilities. I will say this is what I fear the most, is that gap. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Mr. Ranking Member, and to all members for beginning today this necessary but difficult dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manber, very much. Well, now next to hear from Mr. Todd Harrison. Mr. Harrison?
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Babin, and distinguished members of the subcommittee and full committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on this important topic. The fundamental question we're addressing today is what the role of NASA should be in this transitional period, from a focus on low Earth orbit to farther reaching exploration goals on the moon and beyond. When former NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine spoke at CSIS last year, he used the DIME framework of national power, diplomatic, information, military, and economic, to describe how he thinks about the role of NASA. I want to focus my testimony today on NASA's diplomatic and economic roles and how that should impact our thinking about NASA's future in LEO. NASA has a rich history of building international partnerships around the globe, and it has agreements with more than 120 nations. These partnerships help advance U.S. interests in areas such as the environment, human rights, and STEM education. Cooperation in space also increases transparency, it builds confidence, and promotes responsible behavior in space. For example, the coalition of nations that operate the ISS have tightly coupled interests in LEO. We all want to protect the investments we've made and the astronauts that serve aboard the ISS. Our mutual interests in LEO create a strong incentive for us to work together to follow basic norms of behavior, such as avoiding destructive anti-satellite testing and the deliberate creation of space debris. NASA's continued leadership of the ISS coalition is critical to advancing this shared goal. NASA's role in advancing our economic interests is another factor policymakers should consider. Many new commercial space missions are currently being planned, explored, or experimented with by U.S. companies, such as in-space mining and manufacturing. This technology could allow large structures or propellant stores to be built in space using materials that are sourced in space, effectively breaking us free from having to launch everything from Earth. NASA's role is to explore and take technological risks to improve our understanding of the space environment and to provide the enabling infrastructure that private companies can build upon. As we think about the diplomatic and economic roles of NASA and LEO, we must be mindful that other nations are competing with us in space, and perhaps our most formidable competitor is China. The competition with China in space is multifaceted and includes an important security element that the Space Force intelligence community encounter daily. But this competition also has a strong commercial and civil space element that some have called a new space race. Unlike the space race of the 1960s, however, the goal of this race is not a mere destination. It is not a race to see who can build the biggest space station, plant another flag on the moon, or be the first to land humans on Mars. The real objective of this race is to see who can build the broadest and strongest international coalition. Whatever group of nations emerges as the leading coalition in space over the next decade will be the ones that set the de facto norms for the space commerce and exploration that follows. But competition with China does not preclude cooperation. As the members of this subcommittee are well aware, we cooperated with the Soviet Union in space throughout the Cold War, while we competed fiercely with them, both in space and on Earth. Since 2011, however, Congress has placed restrictions on NASA's ability to collaborate with China on civil space programs, a provision known as the Wolf Amendment. This provision was originally intended to pressure China to make human rights reforms and to stifle development of its space capabilities. After 10 years, it is clear that China has not improved its behavior when it comes to human rights, and China's space programs, both military and civil, have only accelerated. What is more concerning is that China is now reaching out to other nations, including some of our closest allies and partners, and asking them to become partners in its space programs. China is actively building a coalition in space to rival our own. In conclusion, I would urge the members of this body to think more holistically about the role of NASA and LEO in the transition plan for the ISS. A precipitous withdrawal of U.S. support for the ISS could create an opening for China to expand its partnerships and ultimately its diplomatic and economic influence in LEO. Our goal should be to strengthen and expand the ISS coalition of nations while also building a new coalition to go to the moon and beyond. It is my view that we should not let go of the ISS coalition before the Artemis coalition is fully assembled and operational. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison. And last, we will hear from Captain William Shepard. The floor is yours, Captain. And Captain, you are muted for the moment.
Astronaut error, sorry. That never happens in space. Chairman Beyer, Ranking Member Babin, and members of the committee and subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to present thoughts on the space station and related space activities. Even before the U.S. had a national space program, engineers and scientists envisioned an orbiting station above the Earth that would be a stepping stone for the exploration of Moon and the other planets. NASA space shuttles and crews using robots and spacewalks built the large ISS vehicle in the weightless vacuum of space, traveling 17,000 miles an hour, a capability we cannot match today. Crews aboard ISS live, explore, and do research in a place that's not part of the Earth anymore. ISS is our foothold in the cosmos. In 21 years of continuous operations, ISS has hosted 65 expeditions, hundreds of astronauts and cosmonaut researchers who have performed thousands of hours of scientific research. In complexity and scale, ISS is my generation's Apollo program. There are many difficulties in the design and construction of this station. Forming a workable international partnership was not easy. Many aerospace critics in the US opposed putting Russian elements in ISS's critical path. Others said it could not be done. History has shown all of them wrong. ISS would not be flying today without our partners' unique capabilities, and especially those that are Russian. And ISS has performed beyond its design capabilities. Many systems and components are operating acceptably at twice their design life. ISS has had no major failures or accidents. One could ask what the benefits are that the Russians brought to the partnership. Working with them, I have seen unique spacecraft and spacecraft system designs, excellent crew equipment and spacesuits, well-developed life support system, excellent metalworking and fabrication, simple but effective thermal control systems, solar arrays and controls, good crew to computer integration. And Russian engineers taught us the most valuable technique, mixing the complex along the simple in their system architectures, creating exceptionally robust capabilities. Today, NASA calls this dissimilar redundancy. This will be a critical characteristic of our future space missions. The numerous ISS changes of command have always been highlights. 30 years ago, an American commander in charge of billions of rubles of Russian state property, or a Russian cosmonaut in charge of a huge US space would have been unthinkable. But this is the reality today. Since last fall, ISS has experienced moderate internal air leakage to space. Leaks have been traced to the interior of the transfer tunnel at the rear of the Russian service module. Leak sources are small surface cracks in the tunnel's aluminum hull. Engineers and technicians in Russia and the US are working together to understand and resolve the issue, but the root cause of the cracking, their failure modes, and the impacts on ISS safety and future operations have not been adequately determined. Top-level NASA and Roscosmos management attention is needed now to focus the technical teams, provide the necessary resources, and drive this issue to closure. Technical operational integration was a major effort in the ISS program. This remains a significant challenge for future programs. Expeditions to the moon will require crews to operate systems designed and built by many different companies, all with distinct characteristics, controls, displays, computer and verbal languages, etc. Small groups of astronauts on the moon may have to make do, as the Apollo 13 crew did, to fit their square CO2 absorbers into round receptacles. This was a graphic illustration of what bad integration looks like. NASA's historical role integrating and verifying hardware and software has been diluted as we rely more heavily on work done by commercial space companies. Considering what we have learned building ISS, this is a big step backwards. A Mars expedition will draw on the best skills and resources from many nations. And I'm going to go right to the end of my prepared statement. Space Station is the blueprint to how to do this. If you ask what a Mars program will look like, these questions are behind us.
Thank you, Captain Shepard. You finished on a very strong note, and I appreciate all the testimonies. And now begin our first round of questions, and I get to go first. So, Dr. Rubins, I'm fascinated by your work on DNA sequencing and the cardinal heart studies. What kind of DNA were you doing? Were you doing human DNA or mouse DNA or E. coli?
Yeah, so we did a mix of E. coli, mouse, and lambdaphage. We were interested in, could we mix this DNA together, sequence it, and then reconstruct the genomes? These are the kinds of technologies that we'll be using when we go to Mars to look for signs of life. And they're also the kinds of technologies that we would use to study complex microbial environments. So if you look at things like microbes in a hospital or microbes on the space station, you want to understand what's a human pathogen, what's dangerous to us. And this is the exact kind of technology that you would use to look at this complex microbial environment. We were very lucky. We were successful, and we had the opportunity, using the research platform of the space station, to analyze these complex microbial environments and make the sequencing technology work in low Earth orbit.
Was it easier or harder to do it in low gravity, no gravity? Is that an advantage, or were you trying to overcome the challenges of that?
Yeah, there were challenges. There's always logistical challenges, and these are not things that we can simulate on Earth. So it's things as simple as your pipette tips floating away in microgravity. We have to figure out, how do we do laboratory research when everything is floating? This is one of the challenges. The technology actually worked incredibly well. It appeared to work slightly better in space than it does on Earth. So sometimes that microgravity environment gives us a technological advantage. For example, when we manufacture optical fibers, it can give you an advantage that's not possible to simulate in Earth laboratories for a lot of these physical properties. Looking ahead, do you see, it was mentioned that perhaps one day we should be establishing a formal national laboratory in space, low Earth orbit? Does that make sense to you? Absolutely. So we have the ISS National Laboratory through the Center for Advancement of Science in Space. And this allows many, both commercial companies as well as academics, to send their experiments to low Earth orbit. This has greatly expanded our access and the number of participants in the International Space Station research community. And so we've seen a lot of really exciting projects. I think this national laboratory is really important for allowing participation from academic and commercial companies and making sure that researchers across the United States of America have access to space as this really unique research environment.
I want to ask about your bone density after 300 days in no gravity, but did you figure out what we're going to do about radiation while you were up there?
Yes, we have done a lot of radiation studies, and this is one of the really important reasons for continuing our research on the International Space Station. We've got a radiation environment in low Earth orbit that we can't simulate right now on Earth. So we can have beams of particular particles, but it's very difficult to get that mix of radiation unless you actually go into space. And so our radiation research on how it affects fundamental mechanisms in cells, how radiation can cause cancer. There's a lot of parallels for these kinds of processes on Earth. This is really only possible in the space environment.
Thank you very much, Doctor. But Captain Shepard, first of all, thank you for the idea of dissimilar redundancy. That's my new learning for the day. But I'm fascinated that after a bunch of testimony about transitioning from government to government to commercial crew, commercial cargo, commercial ISS successor, you said these questions are behind us. Do you strongly believe that we need to maintain the same kind of NASA-led government invested program that we've had?
I think it's a big question. I'm not sure I can give you a short answer, but let me just say that one of the biggest issues that we worked with on ISS was integrating all the procedures, controls, displays, equipment, hardware, et cetera, between the partners and especially with Russia. And it was a tremendous challenge. As an example, the crews on board ISS in the early days, in one of what was 3 different computer environments, there were 2,500 separate display pages on laptops that you would use to control the station and its systems. And you had to know pretty much what every one of them did. And they were all built by different people. And so when we talk about large programs, Artemis in particular, but certainly going to Mars, who is going to integrate all this stuff? And at the end of the day, the astronauts that are going to be on the mission are the final integrators. I think it's very unfair for programs to assume that this is all going to be worked out magically by a bunch of very smart people. We have to have a more directive role of the government to induce the contractors to not give us very disparate ways to interface and control all these pieces of hardware systems and spacecraft. Now, how NASA assumes that role in the future, I don't know, but somebody's got to do it.
Thank you, Captain Shepard, very much. Let me now yield to my friend, Dr. Babin, for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is going to be an exceedingly interesting hearing. I really appreciate this. My first question is for Captain Shepard. First off, I want to say thank you for your service, Captain, as a Navy SEAL, as a father of a Navy SEAL myself. Really appreciate that, and also your years as an astronaut. And this question is regarding the Russian Nauka module and aging of the ISS. A Russian space official recently raised concerns about the deteriorating state of Russia's segment of the ISS due to out-of-date hardware, warning that it could lead to irreparable failures, quote unquote. The official was quoted as saying around 80% of the in-flight systems on Russia's segment have reached the end of their service period, and concluded this means that literally a day after the systems are fully exhausted, irreparable failures may begin. So first, Captain Shepard, you worked on the ISS program at the very beginning. You were the first astronaut on Expedition 1 and also served as a member of the ISS Advisory Committee. How should policymakers view safety and mitigate risk as the ISS ages? And should NASA be worried about the stress placed on the ISS by the inadvertent firing of the Russian Nalka module?
I think the answer to this is to reestablish a much more intimate working relationship with our Russian counterparts. I knew Mr. Soloviev, who's the Russian official you were talking about. He was at the time the manager of their mission control station or center called the Soup in Moscow. Actually, I did not get along with Mr. Soloviev all that well, but I respected his judgment and his ability. But the business of making the space station work was to get close together and sit around the table and work out the problems. Part of the issue with the science module docking, the Nauka that you mentioned, is we do not have that correlation with our Russian counterparts right now. I would think that the primary job would be for us to go into exactly how the Russians noticed problems with that module, what they did to counteract them, what the results were when they docked, and how did this result in inordinate motions and probably stresses on the space station. We have not had that discussion in intimate detail, but that would have been very common 20 years ago. I think that whatever the reason, we've got to reignite the very strong integration that we had with our Russian partners. I'm not sure how to do it, but I believe Congress could be helpful in making that happen.
Okay, thank you very much. My next question is for Ms. Gatens. NASA requested information from contractors on a new proposal to procure spacesuits as a service. The rationale for procuring services rather than developing a system is that the contractors can then sell their systems to other customers, which could potentially lead to lower prices for the government. A NASA 2017 report stated, at this time, no known non-governmental entity is willing to finance and develop their own complete EVA system independent of a government customer. As is the case with environmental control and life support systems designed for spacecraft, there is not currently enough demand that EVA capability can be treated as a regular commodity or a service. The report continued, emergency microgravity and service suit capability is required solely by NASA, and there is insufficient market to support effective co-development. At our recent budget hearing, I asked Administrator Nelson if NASA had identified other customers for spacesuits as required by the anchor tenancy requirements of 51 USJ 50503. He indicated that he would look into it. Who are the other customers NASA has identified that would procure EVA suits or surface suits? And has NASA determined that the long-term viability of the venture is not dependent upon a continued government market or other non-reimbursable government support? And how much private capital is at risk in this venture?
Thank you for the question. As you noted, NASA put out a draft request for proposal to get industry proposals on our change in strategy that will provide spacesuit services commercially. And we recognize that as we expand the commercial economy in low Earth orbit, there could be other customers. We just had the private Inspiration 4 mission. And we anticipate as this economy expands, there will be private demand for spacesuit services in addition to the NASA demand. So we believe that commercializing this procurement, the way we commercialize crew and cargo, will be the most cost-effective way to go forward as we explore.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering from Captain Shepard if there's any other lessons we learned from partnering with the Russians relevant to a potential engagement with China.
Sir, if I might, can I backstep just a bit and talk about the suits for a second?
Certainly.
So one of my frustrations with after I finished my time at NASA was we did very little at NASA in understanding and leveraging the things that we had learned from our experience with the Russians and the Russian Space Agency. I point out the Russian spacesuit, which is fundamentally a different architecture from ours. It is quite durable. It is very simple. And I think it has a lot of design attributes that our system does not. But NASA made almost no effort that I could detect to evaluate that and incorporate any of those design changes in our thinking. And this is the lost opportunity that we see over and over again in particularly our relationship with the Russians in this partnership. If you would ask about the Chinese, besides the political aspect of that, I think there's tremendous value in seeing programs where scientists, engineers, astronauts from different countries approach the same problem in different ways. I think we would gain a lot from the Chinese if we could have that relationship, but I'm not sure what it would take to make that happen.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Babin and Captain Shepard.
Thank you.
Let me now recognize the former governor of Florida, Representative Christ.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. There's no doubt that the International Space Station is crucial to our space program, to our research enterprise, and our international relationships. But as we've discussed today, there will come a time when the space station has reached the end of its operational life, and NASA must have a plan in place for the next generation of low Earth orbit activities. As governor of Florida, when NASA was winding down the shuttle program, I can't help but draw a comparison between the retirement of the space shuttle, which resulted in the rise of a vibrant commercial launch industry, with NASA's current plan to transition the space station to a fully commercialized low Earth orbit. Ms. Gatens, I'm curious, what lessons did NASA learn from the retirement of the shuttle about transitioning to large programs?
Thank you for that question. Yes, indeed. We did experience a gap in our transportation system when we retired the shuttle that we do not wish to repeat with our U.S. human presence in low Earth orbit. And this is a key tenet of our ISS transition plan that NASA has put together. We cannot have a gap in American human spaceflight in low Earth orbit. And this is why NASA is committed to an orderly transition from ISS operations in LEO to U.S. Commercially provided destinations in low Earth orbit. We're currently working with our partners in U.S. industry and just put out a request for proposals and received strong industry feedback on these requests for proposals for commercial LEO destinations. We anticipate having those destinations in place by 2028. And so if we extend the ISS so that we can have an orderly transition and an overlap between the time when we'll have these destinations in LEO and when we do retire the ISS, that'll allow us to mitigate the risk of a gap.
And how can NASA apply those lessons when developing a transition plan for the space station?
We can apply those lessons by planning for this orderly transition and planning to have an overlap in services so that we can ensure that we don't have a gap. We'll follow along as our industry partners mature their concepts and follow their milestones and make sure we're enabling them to make progress so that we can have these capabilities in place that when we need them.
Thank you very much. Mr. Manber, as we transition to a fully commercialized low Earth orbit, can you speak to the importance of having multiple providers and companies operating in this arena?
Yes, and thank you, Congressman. It gets to the heart of your previous question as well. The lessons learned from Space Shuttle and America's dependency on one hardware program. One of the lessons that we all see from the last several decades of the growing public-private partnership between private industry and NASA is the fundamental importance of having different opportunities, different vendors, different choices. If one goes down, if there's a problem, the United States remains fully engaged in space. And so, as I said in my testimony, space is far more critical today than it was several decades ago. So it's absolutely imperative that we have multiple platforms, giving us multiple choices that also provides a stability that is required in low Earth orbit. So thank you for the question.
Well, thank you, sir. And Ms. Gatens, what is NASA doing to drive interest from the commercial space industry and assure the operation of multiple providers in low Earth orbit?
Thank you for that question. Well, in addition to our request for proposals for free flyers, we have also enabled the use of Space Station Forward Port for Axiom to provide an attached commercial element to the space station. So as Mr. Manber just expressed, we have multiple options and multiple pathways to getting these services that we will need to follow on to the station. In addition, we're also enabling demand. So these space station platforms, private platforms, are going to need other customers besides NASA. And so we're using the space station today to allow companies to bring innovative research and try new markets such as optical fibers, such as regenerative medicine, novel materials that seem promising to create new markets and stimulate this non-NASA demand that will be required in low Earth orbit.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
And thank you, Charlie, very much. Next, we'll recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Congressman Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Rubins, NASA's Human Research Program tracks a number of risks that need to be addressed in order to enable future space exploration. Now, the ISS, of course, as you noted, is a key asset in conducting research and mitigating those risks. Understanding that ISS will not operate forever, how is NASA doing at addressing those risks given the length of ISS operations, making all that work together? And maybe for a moment, can commercial solutions help address those risks?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So the Human Research Program has looked at all of our deep space exploration risks, what we need for lunar missions and eventual missions to Mars, categorized those, and then assessed what kind of research needs to address those risks to develop countermeasures. We've then ranked those research risks in terms of order of importance and looked at how many years we think we're going to need to address each of these risks. These risks are things like radiation encountered on the voyage to Mars, our closed loop environmental system. How do we scrub CO2 from the atmosphere? How do we recycle water and provide clean water to astronauts? And the human health risks, things like cardiovascular and bone. And so some of those risks are things that we've now closed out. We've used the ISS to discover a countermeasure to those risks. Some of them are risks that we are going to assess in the next few years, and we have studies that are hopefully going to come close that risk within the next few years. And some of these are longer risks that are really going to require some sustained research in low Earth orbit. We've identified any other places that we could do the research to address these risks. And a lot of times there is no way to do that research on Earth. And so these longer term risks are going to be things that we need to develop countermeasures for before we're going to have a successful mission to Mars. And we do need a platform in low Earth orbit to address these health risks and the really long duration risks.
My next question, I guess, goes both to Director Gatens, but also Mr. Harrison, Manber. We've noted in several comments in this hearing that the international interest in low Earth orbit is not limited to the United States or our partners on the ISS. Could you tell me about the capacities of the Chinese space station, just as a reference point? What do we know about the Chinese space station, and what do we know about their capacities? Whoever cared to touch that first.
I could touch it, and then Todd can jump in. So the Chinese space station has gotten off to a strong start. They've launched their first module, and they just launched a new cargo mission carrying supplies. So they're rapidly assembling the station and have started to accommodate the first crew on the space station. In addition, I know that they're planning for a wide range of activities, including research in some of the key areas that we are doing research on the International Space Station.
Now, I would just add that we actually don't know as much as we would like to about the specific capabilities and technologies on the Chinese space station, because we're not a partner with them. And so we only get to see what they choose to share with us. And of course, one of the downsides of that is it naturally leads to more suspicion and mistrust on both sides. And so, that's why I would urge the Congress to look at ways that we could forge more relationships with the Chinese civil space program so that we have better understanding on both sides of what are they developing, what kind of capabilities do they have, how could that be helpful to some of our science and exploration goals, and where possible, where do we want to partner with them to achieve our mutual science and exploration goals. Of course, I would caution whenever you're talking about bringing in a partner like China, we've got to be careful to make sure that we keep all of our existing partnerships in place on the ISS and make sure all of those nations are fully informed and are on board with what we're doing.
Mr. Manber?
Yes, thank you, sir. A couple of comments, if I may. First off, looking at the program itself, it's a simpler platform. It doesn't have the volume of the International Space Station. The cargo delivery is not as robust as ours. It's going to make certain research more difficult. And the crew is not as robust. They don't have the capacity yet. So in that sense, it's not a one-on-one comparison. The ISS is still far more robust. Having said that, it is a formidable commercial competitor. I submitted into my written testimony a list of our allies that are working with the Chinese, organizations in Japan and France and in Peru. They have some extraordinarily cutting-edge hardware on their platform, representing technology from 2015. And so when we talk about the aging of the International Space Station, it's not only the platforms itself, but the capability for research and when do you make that balance of investing further in the ISS as you look at the natural decay. But to stay focused on your question directly, they are a commercial presence. They're marketing internationally. And I echo that we should engage in some safe way to make sure American presence is in the room, and commercial offers that opportunity.
Chairman will indulge me for half a question. Are there countries who have sent future astronauts to China to be trained to be able to utilize that facility?
Yes, if from what I just read, I turn to my NASA colleagues, but I do understand that ESA has training going on, and Russia as well. So yes, I believe we should be in the room.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas, very much. Now let me recognize the gentleman from Colorado who has some scientific interest in this.
So I want to start with you, Dr. Rubins. Obviously, part of your testimony today has been about our mission to Mars, and the ISS has played a big role, as you've described, in us learning about the effects of long-term existence in space, what it does to people, what it does to plants, what it does. Are we, given the fact, and Mr. Manber just talked about it, that our space station is aging. We've had holes, we've had thruster problems. Are we in a position to continue to do the experiments for the time that you think it's going to take to then help mitigate the risks when we do go to Mars? Is this space station going to last long enough for us to do the experiments that are needed?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. And I flew in 2016 and then just flew this last year. I landed in April. So I've seen this space station across the most recent 5 years of life. And it's in incredible shape. The structures that we've built are very robust. We've done studies at NASA that have proven that we can extend the life of the space station out to 2028. And we really don't see any concerns structurally for longer extension of the space station. The equipment there's original equipment, but there's also a constant addition and improvement of the equipment on board. And so we've seen things like the DNA sequencer, to we're seeing a lot of commercial companies put things like microscopes up there, tools that are going to allow us to assess human health for long duration. And we're also adding things to the life support system. So this is one of the most important questions for Mars. How do we keep humans alive for this 2.5-year mission in deep space? Our life support is going to be absolutely critical. And the microgravity environment of the ISS is incredibly capable. It's large. It allows us to integrate new pieces of the life support system. So while I was up there, we installed several pieces of equipment to further refine our water processing. We're about 90% closed loop, and we're increasing that amount of closed loop water processing. So even today, we're adding new equipment to the space station that's going to allow us to solve these gaps and get to Mars safely and successfully.
Thank you. And this, I'd start with Captain Shepard, I guess, but it's to the whole panel. You mentioned the need for somebody to take leadership in integrating all the systems, all that, and not expect, just because we've got smart astronauts that they can do everything on the fly. I guess my desire is similar to what we've done with the space station, that it be public-private in certain respects, international in scope, if to the degree we could work with the Chinese, continue to work with the Russians. I'd like to see the mission to Mars be that extensive. But what did you mean about the leadership needed to do the integration? Let me start with that.
Well, sir, let me give you a graphic example. We all use the internet, and the internet runs because somebody established a protocol and everybody signed up. And so now it's an immensely valuable thing for, the civilized world. All of our communications protocols are the same way. What I'm saying is there needs to be a framework that you need to see these expeditions and missions to the moon and Mars from the standpoint of the crews who will be at the point of need, the people on the surface or the people in the vehicle. What do they have to deal with and how complex is their job? And the integration has to start from that level and come out. And without some congregation of contractors all agreeing on common standards, or NASA imposing, or some other agency imposing a standard that all will salute, you're not going to have that. And this is what I'm talking about.
So why do you think NASA isn't going to impose the standards? What's the problem there?
I don't see it.
You just think everybody's going their own direction?
I certainly do. We tried to establish just standards for controls and displays on ISS 20 years ago. And as far as I can tell now, it's being used nowhere else.
Okay, my time has expired. I yield back to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Perlmutter. Now I recognize the Congressman from Cape Canaveral, Mr. Posey.
Thank you, Chairman Beyer, and thank you for this great hearing that was really we needed to have. Thank you again. Ms. Gatens, following up on Representative Chris' comments and questions, when I hear the space station gap, I think of the shuttle gap between the last space launch and the first commercial crew launch 9 years later. It left a gaping hole in Florida's Space Coast economy and workforce for sure. A loss of many veteran space workers and left us to rely on Russians to ferry our astronauts to the ISS. Can you give us some idea of the platforms and the destinations that you expect the private sector to propose?
Thank you for that question. Yes, in fact, we are seeing a very strong response to our request for proposals for commercial LEO destinations. And so we expect to see a wide variety of concepts, and I'm looking forward to seeing what our industry partners are proposing there. In addition, so we believe that due to the...
Can you give us just some idea of some of the concepts we might expect to hear?
Well, I haven't seen the proposals. I have seen some earlier industry studies that show different free-flying concepts made of repurposed elements in some case, upper stages, and other more traditional and inflatable kinds of structures. So I think we have that to look forward to, but I have not seen the proposals yet. And if I might just follow up on the previous question regarding standards, NASA did work with our international partners to develop an initial set of international standards for our Artemis program. So I do agree with Bill Shepard, and that's very important, and we are working towards those standards.
Thank you, and I'm glad to hear that. We know that China is trying to change standards in all disciplines over the globe to favor them, and I think we need to take the lead on standard setting for sure. Do you maintain communications with our Space Force and other military sectors?
Yes, I know our administrator routinely communicates with General Raymond of the Space Force, and we work with them obviously at Cape Canaveral for our launches, and they do our range activities. So we have a close communication with Space Force for our activities and human spaceflight.
Thank you. What parts of the ISS are becoming dangerously outdated? I mean, I'm wondering if there are elements of the ISS that can be used for other purposes besides just deorbiting.
Oh, yes, good question. So parts of the ISS are older than others, and there are newer modules that have a lot of useful life left that could potentially be detached and become part of future LEO platforms. So we're not opposed to entertaining those concepts. We haven't studied those in detail, but that is certainly quite possible.
Is it at all feasible to move any usable portions to a lunar orbit or possibly the surface of the moon?
I'm not an orbital mechanics expert. I could take that question. I do not believe that anyone has really proposed doing that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harrison, in your written and your oral testimony today, you mentioned the Wolf Amendment and how it originally intended to pressure China to make human rights reforms and to stifle development of its space capabilities. Then you say after 10 years, it's clear that China has not improved its behavior when it comes to human rights, and China's space programs, military and civilian, have only accelerated. And we know their civilian and their military activities are enjoined. The Wolf Amendment doesn't preclude NASA from working with China. It says that NASA must notify Congress and vet it through the FBI and the State Department. Are you suggesting that Congress and the FBI not be notified per the requirement of the Wolf Amendment that you imply is problematic in your written testimony?
Well, I think the effect of the Wolf Amendment has been to limit that cooperation. And so there have been some examples. There was some recent low-level cooperation on the Chang'e 4 mission, Chinese mission with the lunar rover, where NASA was able to share some information with China. They did jump through all the hoops and go through the FBI and the vetting process and submit it to Congress, and were allowed to do it. So it certainly is possible. The problem is that it has stifled that ability to cooperate. I mean, there are examples where NASA, was being a little overly aggressive in enforcing those restrictions early on, not allowing Chinese scientists to come to conferences where NASA scientists were going to be participating. But that's just, those things have been worked out since then. But that's just an example of how it has really stymied our ability to engage in a meaningful way with China when it comes to civil space. And as you say, we can't really tell the difference between many of their military and civilian space activities. And I think that's a shame. We can tell those distinctions with the Russians because we cooperate with them on the civilian side. We don't have that kind of relationship with China. And importantly, from a military space perspective, we don't have those direct military to military space contacts that we would like. If we had civilian to civilian contacts through our civil space activities, that could actually be a good channel of communication to develop so that we don't end up with misperceptions and actions and potential intended escalation in space in a future military crisis environment?
Thank you for your indulgence in letting the witness answer my question, Mr. Chairman. Time has expired and I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Posey, very much. And let me recognize Representative Kim from California for her questions.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Thank you so much for all of our witnesses for staying with us. I want to pose the question to Director Gatens. You know, NASA's 2018 ISS transition report states that NASA intends to begin shifting responsibility for meeting its needs and requirements in LEO by leveraging private industry capacity, innovation, and competitiveness that would offer the prospect of lower costs to the government to enable NASA to apply more personnel and budget resources on expanding human space flight beyond LEO and enhancing U.S. leadership in human space flight around the world. So with that, can you provide more detail for this committee on how NASA is actively working on or planning to reduce the operational costs of the ISS, as well as more details regarding the private sector's role in reducing operational costs?
Yes, thank you for that question. So we have done some preliminary cost assessment of the efficiencies that we could gain from transitioning from the pretty complex ISS to a more simpler, commercially owned and operated platforms in low Earth orbit. And we believe we can save over $1 billion a year by purchasing services for what we need. We will need NASA going forward in low Earth orbit from these privately owned platforms. As the companies mature their concepts and we learn more about their capabilities and potential prices for these services, we can refine those estimates going forward. But that's kind of our cost estimate right now of the savings. And those savings are important because we will can apply those to expand our exploration efforts beyond low Earth orbit to include the moon and Mars and onto the solar system.
So how will NASA make a final determination about end of life and preparation to deorbit the ISS? What kind of factors will drive that decision?
Yes, thank you for that. We've actually started to generate a list of what we call transition indicators, and what's to tell us when we will be ready to make this transition. The first and foremost indicator is that we have commercial LEO destinations to transition to. That may sound pretty obvious, but that's a prerequisite so that we don't have a gap in low Earth orbit. The second transition indicator that we'll be watching is the health of the space station. We believe it's structurally sound till 2028 and can go beyond that. But we will be watching that as we go forward. Other indicators we're going to be looking at are the development of commercial markets and the readiness of the private sector besides NASA to do activities in low Earth orbit. We'll also want to work with our international partners on this transition plan so that we can have a plan to continue our international partnership in LEO as we do this transition. Not only do we want the international partnership to continue for Artemis, but we want it to continue for low Earth orbit as well, and that's extremely important. So these are some of the indicators that we'll be looking for.
Well, thank you so much. Let me ask a question to Mr. Shepard. You know, in your written testimony, you highlight the recent leaks traced to the rear of the Russian service module and state engineers and technicians in Russia and the US work together to understand and resolve this issue. But the root cause of the cracking, their failure modes, and impacts on ISS safety and future operations have not been adequately determined. So can you tell us how frequently are these cracks and leaks appearing, and are they easily resolved? Have they worsened in the past year?
Congresswoman Kim, thank you for the question. I think I should defer to other NASA technical experts for the exact details, but I'll tell you what I know. based on 2 meetings with the advisory committee. The cracks have appeared recently. They're quite small. They look like scratches on the surface of the aluminum plate. The plate itself is very thin, but the material is quite ductile. So that allows it to resist basically growth of flaws like cracks. I've been in the factory where this module was made, and I'm pretty sure I may have seen pieces of it in my earlier life. And as far as I know, the Russian engineers and the NASA engineers they've analyzed it. They don't exactly understand why these cracks are appearing now. There are probably something like half a dozen of them. They're quite small. We've assessed that the length that they would need to grow to be a serious problem, they're well short of that. But we know that there are probably other cracks that we haven't found yet. And so I'm just saying that getting to the bottom of this is a fairly serious issue. I don't think the station's in any immediate danger, but before we clear the station for another so many years of operational use, we should better understand this.
Definitely, because we don't want such leaks to jeopardize the long-term operation of the ISS. Well, thank you so much. I see that my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Kim, very much. I now recognize Mr. Webster from Florida for his questions. Congressman Webster, if you are there, and we'll give you another couple of seconds to resurface. And if not, we would love to move to Congressman Brooks from Alabama. Again, if Congressman Brooks is there. If not, Mr. Babin, I'd love to do a second round for anyone who has questions for a second round. And that might give Congressman Webster and Brooks an opportunity to come back.
I'm all, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Babin. So let me begin. I've been fascinated by the tension, the debate tension, not the personal tension, between the Captain Shepard perspective, which I would characterize perhaps as some skepticism in that the private sector, the commercial sector, is going to be able to come in and provide the same level of coordination, diplomacy, redundancy that the long partnership that the ISS has had. So, Ms. Gatens, since it's largely your role right now, number one, is there a larger process within NASA or within the U.S. federal government that takes all the Captain Shepard questions and skepticism and posits it against some of the enthusiasm that, say, Mr. Manber has about our ability to stand up the commercial sector to take over the governmental role that we've had the last couple of decades?
Yes, thank you for that question. This is something that we consider at NASA as we think forward into our procurement strategies. And we've learned that our industry can be quite strong in developing those capabilities and their ability to take over. You know, the government's role is to do the hard things. And we have paved the way in low Earth orbit and brought our industry partners along with us. And right now on the space station, there are over 20 commercial facilities that are owned and operated by gentlemen like Mr. Manber and other companies. And they're bringing customers to those facilities. And so we know that the response from industry is strong, and we believe that they will be ready for this next step in low Earth orbit and enabling NASA to move on to the next hard thing, exploring the moon and Mars and the rest of the solar system.
Thank you. And to Captain Shepard, I defer to you for your thoughts.
I would like to ask Ms. Gatens and maybe anybody else from NASA how NASA has incentivized the contractors who are currently performing commercial space activities involving NASA astronauts, how NASA has incentivized these companies to best integrate their systems with the astronauts and with each other. I'm not sure I see that.
I would welcome both either Ms. Gatens or Mr. Manber to respond to that.
I was going to invite my colleague, Mr. Manber, to respond to that since he has those facilities as well.
Well, thank you. I'm a little bit surprised at this late stage in the growing public-private partnership that we've enjoyed with NASA. We see the ability of SpaceX to take contractor funding and grow and self-invest. At Nanoracks, we're far smaller, of course, but we have the European Space Agency as a customer, the German Space Agency as a customer, the UAE Space Agency. You know, we've self-invested it. They're using our hardware, and it's pretty accepted that the use of commerce as a tool of American power and influence is an important part of that diplomatic, almost soft diplomatic tool. And so the maturing for me, the maturing of the public-private partnerships with NASA is a sign that America's presence in space is both robust and adhering to our core American values.
Mr. Manber, let me jump in because I have a minute left.
I'm sorry.
Just posit two questions. Number one is we have seen with the SpaceX versus Blue Origin, essentially freezing of the moon to Mars as we work through first the protest and then the lawsuit. And because, and I'm a huge fan of commercial, but we're seeing right now that commercial thing is really disrupting Congressman Perlmutter's 2033 schedule. And then number two is, as a businessman myself over many years, what happens when there's no capital or there's not a profitable business model? What keeps us from being in the chip industry, say in space, that gets to where chips are right now, where you just can't fulfill the need because they didn't build the factories.
Well, no method is perfect. We've all endured the delays of the more traditional government contracting. I agree with you that I share with you the concerns of having, let's say, too much influence in the hands of a commercial sector. But we've also seen that the pathway of government contracting has produced problems in and of itself. But over the history of this country, I think commercial markets have shown the most resiliency. And to the second part of your question, that's the whole point of multiplicity of platforms, multiplicity of vendors, and it's just part of the maturing process. So I think commercial gives us the most robustness.
Great. Thank you very much. Interesting debate, which I'm sure is not over. Congressman and Dr. Babin, the floor is yours.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to be going back through with a second round here. I wanted to ask Director Gatens another spacesuit question. The NASA IG recently issued a report on spacesuits and stated, with the evolving and competing requirements of the XMU's stakeholder programs and the agency's uncertainties about mission priorities, NASA is at risk of awarding a contract without clearly defining key technical requirements. Additionally, NASA has yet to formalize its acquisition strategy for next generation spacesuits. According to federal guidance, agencies are required to perform acquisition planning, including identifying the milestones in which decisions are made and addressing all the technical, business, management, and other significant considerations that control an acquisition. Awarding a contract before technical requirements and an acquisition strategy are solidified could result in numerous modifications to the contract, increasing cost and schedule. As our prior work has shown, entering a contract before completing development work can exacerbate costs and schedule risks, particularly if issues are discovered late in the development effort and require costly rework. So, does NASA plan to issue a final RFP, or will it issue a new draft RFP that addresses these significant concerns and have contractors express concerns with the draft RFP? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your question. Although I'm not directly involved in the RFP process, I believe our initial plan was to issue an RFP this fall, but I'm happy to take your question and talk with those folks. I honestly have not seen the industry comments, so cannot comment on those concerns, but happy to take that question.
Okay, yeah, we would certainly love to have some answers there. Okay, also to you as well, Director Gatens. NASA recently announced that an astronaut would not be returning on a Soyuz landing as planned, and that he would remain on the ISS for another 6 months. In a few weeks, Russia will launch an actress and a director to film a movie aboard the ISS, and they will return after a short stay. This would have been the U.S. astronaut's seat home. When did you know that the U.S. astronaut would not be returning to Earth on the fall Soyuz return? Was it before he launched this past spring? And can you provide Congress with the Flight Planning Integration Panel, the FPIP?
Yes, thank you for that question. So we knew that this would be a potential possibility for Mark Vande Hey's stay, and he was informed of that before he launched and was perfectly willing to travel to the space station with that flexibility in mind, he and his family. So we knew that possibility. We didn't know it was for sure until recently when the Russians did ask NASA to formally extend his stay to allow the spaceflight participant mission. And regarding the flight planning, I believe we have worked an alternative product that we've been transmitting to Congress to show you our near-term flight planning and our notional longer-term flight planning. The internal FPIP document has a lot of pre-planning dates on it, and so we prefer to keep that one internal. However, if the product that we've been sending over is not sufficient, we're happy to discuss that further and see how we can give you what you need.
We would certainly like to have that because I don't believe that was sufficient.
Okay, well, happy to discuss that.
If you could have that forthcoming, we would appreciate that. Okay, well, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Babin, very much. Mr. Perlmutter, Congressman Perlmutter, you're recognized if you have additional questions.
I don't. I just enjoy listening to the panel. And I'm sure that once I tell you I don't have any questions, I'll think of 10. But I just appreciate everybody's testimony, and just thank you for your service to our country and for the development of the space program, both as a national program as well as the commercial efforts that we're making. So I just am proud of all of you. So I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Perlmutter, very much. Is Mr. Webster, Congressman Webster, or Congressman Brooks available for questions before we sign off? And then let's give it Mr. Weber from Texas had waved onto the committee and I believe is trying to sign on right now. So let's give Congressman Weber a minute to do this. Mrs. Gatens, while we're waiting for and are you ready, Congressman Weber?
I am, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Okay,
well then the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. This question is for Robyn Gatens. I apologize for being late, but at any rate, I'll start there. The NASA Aeronautics and Space Administration Transition Authorization Act of 2017 required NASA to provide Congress with a transition plan for the ISS to address several absolute specific topics. Quite frankly, NASA delivered a plan that was less than adequate. It was supposed to provide an update this year. So I guess my question for Ms. Robyn is, where is that plan? And will it include all the elements which were required under the previous act?
Thank you for that question. Yes, we are working on the update to that transition report right now. It's actually going through agency review, and we will be sending it over to Congress in the coming weeks. I believe that you'll find that it is a much more thorough strategic and tactical plan for ISS transition to commercial LEO destinations, as we've been describing. It has evolved since the initial report to include many more details, cost projections, transition indicators, our requirements in low Earth orbit going forward. So I think it's a more comprehensive report than we previously had due to the maturation of our planning here. So we look forward to sending that over very soon.
Well, that's good news. Second question is ISS has flown, as we're all aware, over 100 projects from 100 different nations. Now the Chinese are using their space station to attract partnerships and engagement with other countries, while ISS's final years and post-ISS planning remains uncertain. Glad to hear the report's going to be that extensive. But the question is it NASA risking leaving low Earth orbit to the Chinese by setting up development programs to begin in a year or two, when it has already had one follow-on station and develop Axiom, for example? Question, why not double down on that station?
Thank you for that question. So we believe we need multiple paths so that we have the greatest chance of success for one or hopefully more commercial LEO platforms in low Earth orbit. So the Axiom commercial element on space station is one of those paths. We had always intended to follow that with a commercial free flyer solicitation, which we have now done. And we've seen strong industry feedback and to that request for proposals. So that tells us that was a good strategy on our part. There is strong interest in multiple platforms in low Earth orbit.
Well, I don't see the clock. So how much time do I have, Mr. Chairman?
Just about 2 minutes, just a little less.
Thank you, sir. So I'm going to follow up with that question for you, Ms. Robyn, if I can. Do you agree that NASA should be able to assure the U.S. scientific and research community, as well as our international partners, that there is a plan moving forward together which provides for the continuity of scientific and research collaboration in space, that does leave the world relying on China for activities in microgravity? What do you say to that?
Yes, thank you for that. Our plan absolutely emphasizes that plan so that this important microgravity research can continue. When we define what we, NASA, are interested in purchasing services for from private space stations, it not only includes NASA research, but also includes the same kinds of things that we're enabling through the ISS National Laboratory today. So other government agency research, private industry, incubation kinds of commercial research, education, academia research. So all of these things we think are important to continue, as well as our international partnerships. And we're doing that planning right now to define and refine those forecasts so that we can provide industry with an updated plan for the kinds of services that the government will purchase.
Well, thank you for that answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me piggyback on your committee. I appreciate it. I yield back.
Congressman Weber, you are always welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
If our committee members have no more questions, then I want to thank our 5 witnesses very much. It's been a really, really interesting question. And we never even got to Point Nemo in the Pacific. So we'll have to come back and talk about how Ms. Gates plans to deorbit what's left of the space station after everything else has been sorted out. But we really, really appreciate that. Formally, the record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from the members and for any additional questions the committee may ask of the witnesses. So with that, again, my hearty thanks. The witnesses are now excused and we are now adjourned.